Franny baby. Come here, girl. Come on. Franny baby. Franny baby. Franny baby. Yeah. Yeah. Who's a good girl? Who's a good little mumpkin head? Who's a good girl? Yeah, anybody out there? Anybody? All right, you guys, this is going to be the actual reading of part 3 because I feel like some students need it because I guess they can't read themselves. Anybody out there? Brownie, that you, Brownie, that you. Good girl. Good girl. All right, Brownie, here, you can go out. Okay. Good girl. Why do I feel like this isn't working again? Yo, anybody out there? Anybody? There he is. What's up, kid? Yo, I'm going to do the actual reading now because I feel like a couple of kids need it and they don't want to say anything. All right, good. This thing's working. Bro, I couldn't shut off my YouTube live stream from before. It went on for like an hour and 40 minutes. I had to delete the whole thing. So annoying. All right, bro, I'm just going to start this reading so people can watch tomorrow. You don't have to be on, whatever. If you want, whatever. All right, let me get to this friggin' reading thingy thing. I'm literally the only person here. Bro, that's crazy. I know, it's friggin' nuts. Yeah, because I was doing it, bro, and it wouldn't let me go on, and I don't know what the hell happened. All right, let me read this thing, bro. Okay. All right, I'm just going to read this thing, bro. If you want to chat. All right. All right. Here we go. Part 3 of the reading. Today is Eddie's damn birthday. And as you guys recall, the birthdays are use of flashback to go back in Eddie's life. This first birthday here in the part 3 is his 7th. He's 7 years old, and this birthday is a very important one because it has to do with the Blue Man's death. All right? Today's Eddie's birthday. He's 7 years old, and his gift is a new baseball. He squeezes it in each hand, feeling a surge of power that runs up his arms. He imagines he's one of the heroes on the Cracker Jack collector cards, maybe the great pitcher Walter Johnson. Here, toss it, his brother Joe says. They are running along the midway. Now, remember, Joe is the older brother. Eddie is the younger brother. Just remember that. They're running along the midway past the game booth where if you knock over 3 green bottles, you win a coconut and a straw. Come on, Eddie, Joe says. Share. Eddie stops and imagines himself in a stadium. He throws the ball. Remember, he's 7 years old. His brother pulls on his elbows and ducks. Too hard, Joe yells. My ball, Eddie screams. Dang you, Joe. Eddie watches it thump down the boardwalk and bang off a post into a small clearing behind the sideshow tents. The hell? Okay. Eddie watches it thump down the boardwalk, bang off a post into a small clearing behind the sideshow tents. He runs after it. Joe follows into a small clearing. Can I read? He runs after it. Joe follows. They drop it to the ground. You see it, Eddie says. Nuh-uh. All right, hold on. The children. Oh, okay. Yo, what is wrong with me? A whumping noise interrupts them. A tent flap opens. Eddie and Joe look up. There's a grossly fat woman and a shirtless man with reddish hair covering his entire body. Freaks from the freak show. The children freeze. What are you wiseacres doing back here? The hairy man says, grinning. Looking for trouble? Joe's lip trembles. He starts to cry. He jumps up and runs away, his arms pumping wildly. Eddie rises too, then sees his ball against a sawhorse. He eyes the shirtless man and moves slowly towards him. This is mine, he mumbles. He scoops up the ball and runs after his brother. That was a flashback. They were playing ball, threw the ball, ran after the ball. Now we're back to present day. Present day meaning Eddie's in heaven. All right. If you recall, speaking to the blue man. Listen, mister, Eddie rasped. I never killed you, okay? I don't even know you. The blue man sat on a bench. He smiled as if trying to put a guest at ease. Eddie remained standing, a defensive posture. Alexa, stop music. Let me begin with my real name, the blue man said. I was christened Joseph Korvalchik, the son of a tailor in a small Polish village. We came to America in 1894. I was only a boy. My mother held me over the railing of the ship, and this became my earliest childhood memory, my mother swinging me in the breezes of a new world. Like most immigrants, we had no money. We slept on a mattress in my uncle's kitchen. My father was forced to take a job in a sweatshop, sewing buttons on coats. When I was 10, he took me from school and I joined him. Eddie watched the blue man's pitted face, his thin lips, his sagging chest. Why is he telling me this, Eddie thought. I was a nervous child by nature, and the noise of the shop only made things worse. Only made things worse. I was too young to be there amongst all those men, swearing and complaining. Yo, what the hell? Oh, okay. Okay, I'm sorry, you guys. This is my first time using the tablet. Okay. I was a nervous child by nature, and the noise in the shop only made things worse. I was too young to be there, amongst all those men swearing and complaining. Whenever the foreman came near, my father told me, "Look down. Don't make him notice you." Once, however, I stumbled and dropped a sack of buttons, which spilled all over the floor. The foreman screamed that I was worthless, a worthless child, that I must go. I can still see that moment, my father pleading with him like a street beggar, the foreman sneering, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. I felt my stomach twist in pain. Then I felt something wet on my leg. I looked down. The foreman pointed at my soiled pants and laughed, and the other workers laughed too. Oh, they're so annoying. After that, my father refused to speak to me. He felt, hold on, goddamn. Hold on, my bad. The hell? All right, here we go. Yo, that's great. I just realized that this is a touchscreen. That's freaking great. Okay. After that, my father refused to speak to me, but he felt I had shamed him, and I suppose in his world I had. But fathers can ruin their sons, and I was, in a fashion, ruined after that. I was a nervous child, and when I grew, I was a nervous young man. Worst of all, at night, I still wet the bed. In the mornings, I would sneak the soiled sheets to the wash basin and soak them. One morning, I looked up to see my father. He saw the dirty sheets, then glared at me with eyes that I'll never forget, as if he wished he could snap the cord of life between us. The blue man paused. His skin, which seemed to be soaked in blue fluid, folded in small fatty layers around his belt. Eddie couldn't help staring. I was not always a freak, Edward, he said. But back then, medicine was rather primitive. I went to a chemist, seeking something for my nerves. He gave me a bottle of silver nitrate and told me to mix it with water and take it every night. Silver nitrate. It was later considered poison, but it was all I had. And when it failed to work, I could only assume I was not ingesting enough. So I took more. I swallowed 2 gulps and sometimes 3 with no water. Soon people were looking at me strangely. My skin was turning the color of ash. I was ashamed and agitated. I swallowed even more of the silver nitrate until my skin went from a gray to blue, a side effect of the poison. The blue man paused. His voice dropped. The factory workers dismissed me. The foreman said I scared the other workers. Without work, how would I eat? Where would I live? I found a saloon or a bar, a dark place where I could hide beneath a hat and coat. One night, a group of carnival men were in the back. They smoked cigars. They laughed. One of them, a rather small fellow with a wooden leg, kept looking at me. Finally, he approached. By the end of the night, I had agreed to join their carnival, and my life as a commodity had begun. Eddie noticed the resigned look on the Blue Man's face. He'd often wondered where the sideshow cast came from. He assumed there was a sad story behind every one of them. The carnivals gave me my names, Edward. Sometimes I was the Blue Man of the North Pole, or the Blue Man of Algeria, or the Blue Man of New Zealand. I had never been to any of these places, of course, but it was pleasant to be considered exotic, if only on a painted sign. The show was simple. I would sit on the stage half undressed as people walked past, and the barker told them how pathetic I was. For this, I was able to put a few coins in my pocket. The manager once called me the best freak in his stable, and sad as it sounds, I took pride in that. When you're an outcast, even a tossed stone can be cherished. One winter I came to this pier, Ruby Pier. They were starting a sideshow called the Curious Citizens. I liked the idea of being in one place, escaping the bumpy horse carts of carnival life. This became my home. I lived in a room above a sausage shop. I played cards all night with the other sideshow workers, with the tinsmiths, sometimes even with your father. In the early mornings, if I wore long shirts and draped my head in a towel, I could walk along this beach without scaring people. It may not sound like much, but for me it was a freedom I'd rarely known. He stopped. He looked at Eddie. Do you understand why we're here? This is not your heaven. It's mine. All right, hold on. I gotta take a check. This is a good part. Yo, who's with me, bro? Zach, you still here? Yo, who's Dizzy? Yo, there's my dude, Dinesh. Yo, who the hell's Dizzy? Yo, we had so many other people on before. I got like 2. It's all right. They'll all watch it tomorrow. It's all good. Yo, Dizzy, who are you? Yo, what do you know about Dizzy Gillespie? All right, I'm going back to reading. Okay. All right, so the Blue Man's telling Eddie all this at Ruby Pier. When Eddie dies, where he died, he wakes up to Heaven's Ruby Pier. The Blue Man's calling his name. He comes into this stage, small little stage, darkened room. No one's at the pier. None of the rides are working. Eddie doesn't understand what the hell's going on. He can't talk. He can't speak yet. All right, so take one story viewed from 2 different angles. Now, remember Eddie's 7th birthday. This plays a role here. Take a rainy Sunday morning in July in the late 1920s when Eddie and his friends are tossing a baseball Eddie got for his birthday nearly a year ago. Take a moment when that ball flies over Eddie's head out into the street. Eddie, wearing tawny pants and a wool cap, chases after it and runs in front of an automobile, a Ford Model A. The car screeches, veers, just misses him. He shivers, exhales, gets the ball, races back to his friends. The game soon ends with the children run to the arcade to play the Erie Digger machine with its claw-like mechanism that picks up small toys. Now take that same story from a different angle. A man's behind the wheel of a Ford Model A, which he's borrowed from a friend to practice his driving. The road's wet from the morning rain. Suddenly a baseball bounces across the street, and a boy comes racing after it. The driver slams on the brakes and yanks the wheel. The car skids, the tires screech. The man somehow regains control, and the Model A rolls on. The child has disappeared in the rearview mirror, but the man's body is still affected, thinking of how close he came to tragedy. The jolt of adrenaline has forced his heart to pump furiously, and this heart is not a strong one, and the pumping leaves him drained. The man feels dizzy, and his head drops momentarily. His automobile nearly collides with another. The second driver honks. The man veers again, spinning the wheel, pushing on the brake pedal. He skids along an avenue, then turns down an alley. His vehicle rolls until it collides with the rear of a parked truck. There is a small crashing noise. The headlights shatter. The impact smacks the man into the steering wheel. His forehead bleeds. He steps from the Model A, sees the damage, then collapses onto the wet pavement. His arm throbs. His chest hurts. It's a Sunday morning. Sunday morning, the alley is empty. He remains there, unnoticed, slumped against the side of the car. The blood from his coronary arteries no longer flows to his heart. An hour passes. A policeman finds him. A medical examiner pronounces him dead. The cause of death is listed as heart attack. There are no known relatives. Take one story viewed from two different angles. It's the same day, the same moment, but one angle ends happily at the arcade with a little boy in tawny pants dropping pennies into the Erie Digger machine, and the other ends badly in a city morgue where one worker calls another worker over to marvel at the blue skin of their newest arrival. You see, the blue man whispered, having finished the story from his point of view. Little boy, Eddie felt a shiver. Oh no, he whispered. So Eddie didn't know. He lived 83 years, his whole life, had no idea that he played a role in someone's death. All right. So the first person he meets is the blue man. The blue man lets him know, yo, bro, not for nothing. When you were 7, you ran out to get this ball with your brother. I had major heart issues and I swerved. I know it wasn't your fault, but I did die due to, the ball incident with you and your brother. All right. So first person. We go back to birthday. He's 8. And the irony on this one, he's 8 years old. He sits on the edge of a plaid couch, his arms crossed in anger. His mother's at his feet, tying his shoes. His father at the mirror, fixing his tie. I don't want to go, Eddie says. I know, his mother says, not looking up, but we have to. Sometimes you have to do things when sad things happen. But it's my birthday. Eddie looks mournfully across the room at the erector set on the corner, a pile of toy metal girders and 3 small rubber wheels. Eddie's been making a truck. He's good at putting things together. He'd hoped to show it to his friends at a birthday party. Instead, they have to go someplace and get dressed up. It isn't fair, he thinks. His brother Joe, dressed in wool pants and a bow tie, enters with a baseball glove on his left hand, slaps it hard, makes a face at Eddie. Those were my old shoes, Joe says. My new ones are better. Eddie winces. He hates having to wear Joe's old things. Stop wiggling, his mother says. They hurt, Eddie whines. Enough, his father yells. He glares at Eddie. Eddie goes silent. At the cemetery, Eddie barely recognizes the pier people. The men who normally wear gold lame and red turbans are now in black suits like his father. The women seem to be wearing the same black dress. Some cover their faces in veils. Eddie watches a man shovel dirt into a hole. The man says something about ashes. Eddie holds his mother's hand and squints at the sun. He's supposed to be sad, he knows, but he's secretly counting numbers starting from 1, hoping that by the time he reaches 1,000, he will have his birthday back. So Eddie, on his 8th birthday, goes to the blue man's funeral, which, of course, at 8, he had no idea that he essentially caused it, and he doesn't want to be there, and he's 8 years old. He doesn't realize he played a role in this. And Wyatt at the funeral realized Eddie's dad, whose also his name is Edward, used to work at the pier. All right, so he was close with the blue man and all the people from the sideshow cast. All right, so, yeah, Eddie essentially caused the death of the blue man. All right. And he's finding this out in heaven. And that's the purpose of this novel. The author believes that when we die, 5 people will be waiting for us in a line in heaven to tell us the questions that we want answered, that we didn't even know existed in our lives, that we didn't know we had a role in. All right. So first person down. All right. First lesson. Now, through every person he meets in heaven, there's a lesson to be learned. All right, it's not just like you did this and no, you did this, and this is the lesson to be learned from it. All right, so all right, let me see. This is Gianluca, my dude. Gianluca, I was bragging about you before on the other live stream I did, calling you my number 1 writer. All right, let me get back to reading this. All right, first lesson. Please, Mr. Eddie pleaded. I didn't know. Believe me, God help me, I didn't know. The blue man nodded. You couldn't know. You were too young. Eddie stepped back. He squared his body as if bracing for a fight. But now I gotta pay, he said. To pay? For my sin. That's why I'm here, right? Justice? The blue man smiled. Excuse me. No, Edward, you're here so I could teach you something. All the people you meet here have one thing to teach you. Eddie was skeptical. His fist stayed clenched. What? He said. There are no random acts, that we are all connected, that you can no more separate one life from another than you could separate a breeze from the wind. Eddie shook his head. We were throwing a ball. It was my stupidity running out there like that. Why should you have to die on account of me? It isn't fair. The blue man held out his hand. Fairness, he said, does not govern life and death. If it did, no good person would ever die young. Yo, these are some valid quotes, just saying. He rolled his palm upward, and suddenly they were standing in a cemetery behind a small group of mourners. All right, so they're in Ruby Pier, but the blue man is taking Eddie back to his funeral being the blue man's. Eddie rolled his palm upward, and suddenly they were standing in a cemetery beside a small group of mourners. A priest by the gravesite was reading from a Bible. Eddie could not see faces, only the backs of hats, dresses, and suit coats. My funeral, the blue man said. Look at the mourners. Some did not even know me well, yet they came. Why? Did you ever wonder why people gather when others die? Why people feel they should? It's because the human spirit knows deep down that all lives intersect, that death doesn't just take someone, it misses someone else. And in the small distance between being taken and being missed, lives are changed. You say you should have died instead of me, but during my time on earth, people died instead of me, too. It happens every day. When lightning strikes a minute after you're gone, or an airplane crashes that you might have been on. When your colleague falls ill and you do not. We think such things are random, but there is a balance to it all. One withers, another grows. Birth and death are part of a whole. It's why we're drawn to babies. He turned to the mourners and to funerals. Eddie looked again at the gravesite gathering. He wondered if he'd had a funeral. He wondered if anyone came. He saw the priest reading from the Bible and the mourners lowering their heads. This was the day the blue man had been buried, all those years ago. Eddie had been there, a little boy fidgeting through the ceremony, with no idea the role he'd played in it. I still don't understand, Eddie whispered. What good came from your death? You lived, the blue man answered. But we barely knew each other. I might as well have been a stranger. The blue man put his arm on Eddie's shoulders. Eddie felt that warm, melting sensation. Strangers, the blue man said, are just family you have yet to come to know. With that, the blue man pulled Eddie close. Instantly, Eddie felt everything the blue man had felt in his life rushing into him, swimming in his body, the loneliness, the shame, the nervousness, the heart attack. It slid into Eddie like a drawer being closed. I'm leaving, the blue man whispered in his ear. This step of heaven is over for me, but there are others for you to meet. Wait, Eddie said, pulling back. Just tell me one thing. Did I save the little girl? At the pier, did I save her? The blue man did not answer. Eddie slumped. Then my death was a waste, just like my life. No life is a waste, the blue man said. The only time we waste is the time we spend thinking we are alone. He stepped back toward the gravesite and smiled. And as he did, his skin turned the loveliest shade of caramel, smooth and unblemished. It was, Eddie thought, the most perfect skin he'd ever seen. Wait, Eddie yelled. But he was suddenly whisked into the air, away from the cemetery, soaring above the great gray ocean. Below him he saw the rooftops of old Ruby Pier, the spires and turrets, the flags flapping in the breeze. Then it was gone. All right, hold on, drink time. All right, yo, anybody still here? Or you guys all left me? Oh my God, Gianluca. No problem, bro. No problem. You and a couple other kids are doing 3-4 pages. Some other kids are doing one paragraph. Like, yeah, he met the blue man and he was in a teacup. Peace. Yeah, above and beyond, Gianluca. That's why you're a friggin' honor student. That's why you're going to be the friggin' smartest student in your senior class. Telling you, when you're in 12th grade, holler at me. I'm telling you. Yo, who was Dizzy? That was on here. I don't even know who Dizzy. Half these people. What are you gonna do? All right, let me finish this bad boy. Sunday, 3 p.m., back at the pier, the crowd stood silently around the wreckage of Freddy's Freefall. Old women touched their throats. Mothers pulled their children away. Several burly men in tank tops slid into the front, as if this were something they should handle. But once they got there, they, too, only looked on, helpless. The sun baked down, sharpening the shadows, causing them to shield their eyes as if they were saluting. How bad is it? People whispered. From the back of the crowd, Dominguez burst through, his face red, his maintenance shirt drenched in sweat. He saw the carnage. Ah, no, Eddie, he moaned, grabbing his head. Security workers arrived. They pushed people back, but then they too fell into impotent postures, hands on their hips, waiting for the ambulances. It was as if all of them, the mothers, the fathers, the kids with their giant gulp soda cups, were too stunned to look and too stunned to leave. Death was at their feet as a carnival tune played over the park speakers. How bad is it? Sirens sounded. Men in uniforms arrived. Yellow tape was stretched around the area. The arcade booths pulled down their grates. The rides were closed indefinitely. Word spread across the beach of the bad thing that had happened, and by sunset, Ruby Pier was empty. All right. What are we on now? Birthday. Eddie's birthday. From his bedroom, even with the door closed, Eddie can smell the beefsteak his mother's grilling with green peppers, sweet red onions, a strong woody odor that he loves. Eddie, she yells from the kitchen. Where are you? Everyone's here. He rolls off the bed and puts away the comic book. He's 17 today, too old for such things, but he still enjoys the idea. Colorful heroes like the Phantom, fighting the bad guys, saving the world. He's given his collection to his school-aged cousins from Romania, who came to America a few months earlier. Eddie's family met them at the docks, and they moved into the bedroom that Eddie shared with his brother, Joe. The cousins cannot speak English, but they like comic books. Anyhow, it gives Eddie an excuse to keep them around. There's the birthday boy, his mother crows when he rambles into the room. He wears a button-down white shirt and a blue tie which pinches his muscular neck. A grunt of hellos and raised beer glasses come from the assembled visitors. Family, friends, peer workers. Eddie's father's playing cards in the corner in a small cloud of cigar smoke. Hey, Ma, guess what? Joe yells out. Eddie met a girl last night. Ooh, did he? Eddie feels a rush of blood. Yeah, said he's going to marry her. Shut your trap, Eddie says to Joe. Joe ignores him. Yep. Came into the room all googly-eyed and said, Joe, I met the girl I'm going to marry. Eddie seethes, meaning he gets angry. I said, shut it. What's her name, Eddie? Someone asked. Does she go to church? Eddie goes to his brother and socks him in the arm. Ow! Eddie, I told you to shut it. Joe blurts out and he danced with her at the he's going to say Stardust band shell. Whack! Ow! Shut up. Eddie, stop that. Even the Romanian cousins look up now. Fighting they understand as the two brothers grab each other and flail away, clearing the couch until Eddie's father puts down a cigar and yells, knock it off before I slap both ears. The brothers separate, panting and glaring. Some older relatives smile. One of the aunts whispers, he must really like this girl. Later, after the special steak has been eaten and the candles have been blown out and most of the guests have gone home, Eddie's mother turns on the radio. There's news about the war in Europe, and Eddie's father says something about lumber and copper wire being hard to get if things got worse. That will make maintenance of the park nearly impossible. Such awful news, Eddie's mother says. Not at a birthday. She turns the dial until the small box offers music and an orchestra playing a swing melody, and she smiles and hums along. Then she comes over to Eddie, who's slouched in his chair, picking at the last pieces of cake. She removes her apron, folds it over her chair, and lifts Eddie by the hands. Show me how you dance with your new friend, she says. Aw, Ma, come on. Eddie stands as if being led to his execution. His brother smirks, but his mother, with her pretty brown face, keeps humming and stepping back and forth until Eddie falls into a dance step with her. Yeah, da, da, dee. She sings it with the melody. When you're with me, da, da, the stars and the moon, the da, da, da. In June, they move around the living room until Eddie breaks down and laughs. He's already taller than his mother by a good 6 inches. Yet she twirls him with ease. So, she whispers, you like this girl? Eddie loses a step. It's all right, she says. I'm happy for you. They spin to the table, and Eddie's mother grabs Joe and pulls him up. Now you two dance, she says. With him? Ma. But she insists, and they relent, and soon Joe and Eddie are laughing and stumbling into one another. They join hands and move, swooping up and down in exaggerated circles. Around and around the table they go, to their mother's delight, as the clarinets lead the radio melody, and the Romanian cousins clap along, and the final wisps of grilled steak evaporate into the party air. All right, second person, Eddie meets in heaven. Okay. Second person Eddie meets in heaven. Eddie felt his feet touch the ground. The sky was changing again from cobalt blue to charcoal gray, and Eddie was surrounded now by fallen trees and blackened rubble. He grabbed his arms, shoulders, thighs, and calves. He felt stronger than before, but when he tried to touch his toes, he could no longer do so. The limberness or flexibility was gone. No more childish, rubbery sensation. Every muscle he had was as tight as a piano wire. He looked around at the lifeless terrain. On a nearby hill lay a busted wagon and the rotting bones of an animal. Eddie felt a hot wind whip across his face. The sky exploded to a flaming yellow. And once again, Eddie ran. He ran differently now, in the hard, measured steps of a soldier. He heard thunder, or something like thunder, explosions, bomb blasts. He instinctively fell to the ground, landed on his stomach, pulled himself along by his forearms. The sky burst open and gushed rain, thick brownish downpour. Eddie lowered his head and crawled along in the mud, spitting away the dirty water that gathered around his lips. Finally, he felt his head brush against something solid. He looked up to see a rifle dug into the ground, with a helmet sitting atop it and a set of dog tags hanging from the grip. Blinking through the rain, he fingered the dog tags and scrambled backward wildly into a porous wall of stringy vines that hung from a massive banyan tree. He dove into their darkness. He pulled his knees into a crouch. He tried to catch his breath. Fear had found him, even in heaven. The name on the dog tags was his. All right, second person is my favorite out of all five. If you like war stories, if you like war movies, I mean, I for whatever reason, I'm partial to that kind of stuff. This is good stuff. Hold on. All right, young men go to war, sometimes because they have to, sometimes because they want to. Always they feel they are supposed to. This comes from the sad layered stories of life, which over the centuries have seen courage confused with picking up arms and cowardice confused with laying them down. When his country entered the war, Eddie woke up early one rainy morning, shaved, combed back his hair, and enlisted. Others were fighting. He would too. His mother did not. Hold on. His mom did not want him to go. His father, when informed of the news, lit a cigarette, blew the smoke out slowly. When was all he asked. Since he never fired an actual rifle, Eddie began to practice at the shooting arcade at Ruby Pier. You paid a nickel and the machine hummed, and you squeezed the trigger and fired metal slugs at pictures of jungle animals, a lion or a giraffe. Eddie went every evening after running the brake levers at the Little Folks Miniature Railway. Ruby Pier had a number of new, smaller attractions because roller coasters after the Depression had become too expensive. The Miniature Railway was pretty much just that, the train cars no higher than a grown man's thigh. Eddie, before enlisting, had been working to save money to study engineering. That was his goal. He wanted to build things, even if his brother Joe kept saying, "Come on, Eddie, you aren't smart enough for that." But when the war started, Pier business dropped. Most of Eddie's customers now were women alone with their children, their fathers gone to fight. Sometimes the children asked Eddie to lift them over his head, and when Eddie complied, he saw the mother's sad smiles. He guessed it was the right lift, but the wrong pair of arms. Soon, Eddie figured he would join those distant men, and his life of greasing tracks and running brake levers would be over. War was his call to manhood. Maybe someone would miss him too. On one of those final nights, Eddie was bent over the small arcade rifle, firing with deep concentration. Pang, pang, he tried to imagine actually shooting at the enemy. Would they make a noise when he shot them? Pang, or would they just go down like the lions and giraffes? Pang, pang, practicing to kill, are you, lad? Mickey Shea was standing behind Eddie. His hair was the color of French vanilla ice cream, wet with sweat, and his face was red from whatever he'd been drinking. Eddie shrugged and returned to his shooting. Pang, another hit. Another. Mickey grunted. Eddie wished Mickey would go away and let him work on his aim. He could feel the old drunk behind him. He could hear his labored breathing, the nasal hissing in and out, like a bike tire being inflated by a pump. Eddie kept shooting. Suddenly, he felt a painful grip on his shoulder. Listen to me, lad. Mickey's voice was a low growl. War is no game. If there's a shot to be made, you make it. You hear? No guilt, no hesitation. You fire and you don't think about who you're shooting or killing or why. You hear me? You want to come home again? You just fire. You don't think. He squeezed even harder. It's the thinking that gets you killed. Eddie turned and stared at Mickey. Mickey slapped him hard on the cheek, and Eddie instinctively raised his fist to retaliate. But Mickey belched and wobbled backward. Then he looked at Eddie as if he were going to cry. The mechanical gun stopped humming. Eddie's nickel was up. Young men go to war, sometimes because they have to, sometimes because they want to. A few days later, Eddie packed a duffel bag and left the pier behind. All right, the rain stopped. Eddie, shivering and wet beneath the banyan tree, exhaled a long, hard breath. He pulled the vines apart and saw the rifle and helmet still stuck in the ground. He remembered why soldiers did this. It marked the graves of their dead. He crawled out on his knees, off in the distance below a small ridge, where the remains of a village, bombed and burnt into a little more than rubble. For a moment, Eddie stared, his mouth slightly open, his eyes bringing the scene into tighter focus. Then his chest tightened like a man who just had bad news broken. This place, he knew it. It had haunted his dreams. Smallpox, a voice suddenly said. Eddie spun. Smallpox, typhoid, tetanus, yellow fever came from above somewhere in the tree. So Eddie, this is his second pocket of heaven, and he's looking up in this big banyan tree. It's a big, thick, bushy tree, and he hears a voice talking to him. All right, and it's ringing a bell, and he fought in the war, and it all looks familiar to him. It seems familiar. It came from above, somewhere in the tree. I never did find out what yellow fever was. Hell, I never met anyone who had it. The voice was strong, with a slight southern drawl and gravelly edges, like a man who'd been yelling for hours. I get all those shots for all those diseases, and I died here anyhow, healthy as a horse. The tree shook. Some small fruit fell in front of Eddie. How you like them apples? The voice said. Eddie stood up and cleared his throat. Come out, he said. Come up, the voice said. And Eddie was in the tree near the top, which was as tall as an office building. His legs straddled a large limb, and the earth below him seemed a long drop away. Though through the smaller branches and thick fig leaves, Eddie could make out the shadowy figure of a man in army fatigues. Sitting back against the tree trunk, his face was covered with a coal-black substance. His eyes glowed red like tiny bulbs. Eddie swallowed hard. Captain? He whispered. Is that you? All right, so we come to understand the second person is the captain. All right, we're going to find out more information right now. All right, first person Blue Man, second person captain. All right, you look at his life timeline. Most of his life was spent at Ruby Pier. Another chunk of it was spent in the war. All right, so obviously they're going to play a role in his afterlife as well. All right, hold on. They had served together in the army. The captain was Eddie's commanding officer. They fought in the Philippines, and they parted in the Philippines. Eddie had never seen him again. He'd heard he died in combat. A wisp of cigarette smoke appeared. They explained the rules to you, soldier? Eddie looked down. He saw the earth far below, yet he knew he could not fall. I'm dead, he said. Got that much right. And you're dead? Got that right, too. And you're my second person? The captain held up a cigarette. He smiled as if to say, Can you believe you get to smoke up here? Then he took a long drag and blew out a small white cloud. Bet you didn't expect me, huh? Okay, now we go back to the war and what Eddie learned and how it affected him. All right, leaving heaven. Eddie learned many things during the war. He learned to ride atop a tank. He learned to shave with cold water in his helmet. He learned to be careful when shooting from a foxhole, lest he hit a tree and wound himself with deflected shrapnel. He learned to smoke, learned to march, learned to cross a rope bridge while carrying all at once an overcoat, a radio, a carbine, a gas mask, a tripod for a machine gun, a backpack, and several bandoliers on his shoulder. He learned how to drink the worst coffee he'd ever tasted. He learned a few words in a few foreign language. He learned to spit a great distance. He learned the nervous cheer of a soldier's first survived combat, when the men slap each other and smile as if it's over. We can go home now. And he learned the sinking depression of a soldier's second combat, when he realized the fighting does not stop at one battle. There is more and more after that. He learned to whistle through his teeth. He learned to sleep on rocky earth. He learned that scabies are itchy little mites that burrow into your skin, especially if you've worn the same filthy clothes for a week. He learned a man's bones really do look white when they burst through the skin. He learned to pray quickly. He learned in which pocket to keep the letters to his family and Marguerite in case he should be found dead by his fellow soldiers. He learned that sometimes you're sitting next to a buddy in a dugout, whispering about how hungry you are, and the next instant there is a small whoosh, and the buddy slumps over, and his hunger is no longer an issue. He learned as 1 year turned to 2, years turned toward 3, that even strong, muscular men vomit on their shoes when the transport plane is about to unload them, and even officers talk in their sleep the night before combat. He learned how to take a prisoner, although he never learned how to become one. Then one night on a Philippine island, his group came under heavy fire, and they scattered for shelter, and the skies were lit. And Eddie heard one of his buddies down in a ditch, weeping like a child, and he yelled at him, "Shut up, will you?" And he realized the man was crying because there was an enemy soldier standing over him with a rifle at his head, and Eddie felt something cold at his neck, and there was one behind him too. All right, so now we go back to the captain in the tree, but realize that last scene there, he's taken captive, POW, prisoner of war. All right, the enemies get these 4 Americans, and we're going to get to that scene after we have this moment back in heaven with the captain. The captain stubbed out his cigarette. He was older than the men in Eddie's troop, a lifetime military man with a lanky swagger and a prominent chin that gave him a resemblance to a movie actor of the day. Most of the soldiers liked him well enough, although he had a short temper and a habit of yelling inches from your face so you could see his teeth, already yellowed from tobacco. Still, the captain always promised he would leave no one behind, no matter what happened, and the men took comfort in that. "Captain," Eddie said again, still stunned. "Affirmative." "Sir?" "No need for that, but much obliged." You look like the last time you saw me?" He grinned, then spat over the tree branch. He saw Eddie's confused expression. "You're right. Ain't no reason to spit up here. You don't get sick either. Your breath is always the same, and the chow is incredible." "Chow?" I didn't get any of this. "Captain, look, there's some mistake. I still don't know why I'm here. I had a nothing life, see? I worked maintenance. I lived in the same apartment for years. I took care of rides, Ferris wheels, roller coasters, stupid little rocket ships. It was nothing to be proud of. I just kind of drifted. What I'm saying is, what am I doing here?" The captain looked at him with those glowing red eyes, and Eddie resisted asking the other question. He now wondered, after the blue man, did he kill the captain too? I've been wondering, the captain said, rubbing his chin. The men from our unit, did they stay in touch? Willingham, Morton, Smitty? Did you ever see those guys? Eddie remembered the names. The truth was, they had not kept in touch. This is a great line. War could bond men like a magnet, but like a magnet, it could repel them too. The things they saw, the things they did, sometimes they just wanted to forget. "To be honest, sir, we all kind of fell out," he shrugged. "Sorry." The captain nodded as if he'd expected as much. "And you? You went back to that fun park where we all promised to go if you got out alive, free rides for all GIs, 2 girls per guy in the tunnel of love. Isn't that what you said?" Eddie nearly smiled. That was what he'd said, what they'd all said. But when the war ended, nobody came. "Yeah, I went back," Eddie said. And I never left. I tried, I made plans, but this damn leg, I don't know, nothing worked out." Eddie shrugged. The captain studied his face. His eyes narrowed. His voice lowered. "You still juggle?" he asked. All right. Now we revert back to war when they're held captive on a Philippine island. All right, go, you go, you go. The enemy soldiers screamed and poked at them with bayonets. Eddie, Smitty, Morton, Rebozo, and the captain were herded down a steep hill, hands on their heads. Mortar shells exploded around them. Eddie saw a figure run through the trees, then fall in a clap of bullets. He tried to take mental snapshots as they marched in the darkness. Huts, roads, whatever he could make out. Knowing such information would be precious for an escape. The plane roared in the distance, filling Eddie with a sudden, sickening wave of despair. It is the inner torture of every captured soldier, the short distance between freedom and seizure. If Eddie could only jump up and grab the wing of that plane, he could fly away from this mistake. Instead, he and the others were bound at the wrists and ankles. They were dumped inside a bamboo barracks. The barracks sat on stilts above the muddy ground, and they remained there for days, weeks, months, forced to sleep on burlap sacks stuffed with straw. A clay jug served as their toilet. At night, the enemy guards would crawl under the hut and listen to their conversations. As time passed, they said less and less. They grew thin and weak. Their ribs grew visible. Even Rebozo, who'd been a chunky kid when he enlisted. Their food consisted of rice balls filled with salt, and once a day, some brownish broth with grass floating in it. One night, Eddie plucked a dead hornet from the bowl. It was missing its wings. The others stopped eating. Their captors seemed unsure of what to do with them. In the evenings, they would enter with bayonets and wiggle their blades at the Americans' noses, yelling in a foreign language, waiting for answers. It was never productive. There were only 4 of them, near as Eddie could tell, and the captain guessed that they, too, had drifted away from a larger unit and were, as often happens in real war, making it up day by day. Their faces were gaunt, skinny, bony with dark nubs of hair. One looked too young to be a soldier. Another had the most crooked teeth Eddie'd ever seen. The captain called them Crazy 1, Crazy 2, Crazy 3, and Crazy 4. We don't want to know their names, he said, and we don't want them knowing ours. Men adapt to captivity, some better than others. Morton, a skinny, chattering youth from Chicago, would fidget whenever he heard noises from outside, rubbing his chin and mumbling, "Oh, damn, oh, damn, oh, damn," until the others told him to shut up. Smitty, a foreman's son from Brooklyn, was quiet most of the time, but he often seemed to be swallowing something, his Adam's apple loping up and down. Eddie later learned he was chewing on his tongue. Rebozo, the young red-headed kid from Portland, Oregon, kept a poker face during the waking hours, but at night he often woke up screaming, "Not me, not me." It's what war does, man. War crawls into your brain, especially if you're held captive like this. Eddie mostly seethed. He clenched a fist and slapped it into his palm, hours on end, knuckles to skin, like the anxious baseball player he'd been in his youth. At night he dreamed he was back at the pier on the Derby horse carousel, where 5 customers raced in circles until the bell rang. He was racing his buddies or his brother or Marguerite, but the dream turned, and the 4 crazies were on the adjacent ponies, poking at him, sneering. Years of waiting at the pier for a ride to finish, for the waves to pull back, for his father to speak to him, had trained Eddie in the art of patience, but he wanted out, and he wanted revenge. He ground his jaws, he slapped his palm, he thought about all the fights he'd been in back in his old neighborhood. The time he'd sent 2 kids to the hospital with the garbage can lid. He pictured what he'd do to these guards if they didn't have guns. Then one morning the prisoners were awakened by screaming and flashing bayonets, and the 4 crazies had them up in bounds and led them down into a shaft. There was no light. The ground was cold. There were picks and shovels and metal buckets. "It's a goddamn coal mine," Morton said. From that day forward, Eddie and the others were forced to strip coal from the walls to help the enemy's war effort. Some shoveled, some scraped, some carried pieces of slate, built triangles to hold up the ceiling. There were other prisoners there, too, foreigners who didn't know English and who looked at Eddie with hollow eyes. Speaking was prohibited. 1 cup of water was given every few hours. The prisoners' faces by the end of the day were hopelessly black, and their necks and shoulders throbbed from leaning over. Hold on. I haven't read this much in 2 months. All right, let's see. Any of you guys still with me? Anybody? Oh, shoot. All right, Val. Yo, Vasquez, what's good, bro? Actually teaching for this moment. It usually doesn't happen. How you doing, my dude? Gianluca, you still here, bro? And Gianluca, no rush on that, bro. It's you. No rush. You can get it in late. All right, yo, let me finish this. Jump off. For the first few months of his captivity, Eddie went to sleep with Marguerite's picture and his helmet propped up in front of him. He wasn't much for praying, but he prayed just the same, making up the words, keeping count each night, saying, "Lord, I'll give you these 6 days if you give me 6 days with her. I'll give you these 9 days if I get 9 days with her. I'll give you these 16 days if I get 16 days with her." Then during the 4th month, something happened. Rebozo developed an ugly skin rash and severe diarrhea. He couldn't eat a thing. At night, he sweated through his filthy clothes until they were soaking wet. He soiled himself. There were no clean clothes to give him, so he slept naked on the burlap, and the captain placed his sack over him like a blanket. The next day, down in the mine, Rebozo could barely stand. The 4 crazies showed no pity. When he slowed, they poked him with sticks to keep him scraping. "Leave him be," Eddie growled. Crazy 2, the most brutal of their captors, slammed Eddie with a bayonet butt. The butt ends of the bayonet. A bayonet, if you don't know, is a rifle with a knife at the end of it. Short range and long range murdering. He went down, a shot of pain spreading between his shoulder blades. Rebozo scraped a few more pieces of coal, then collapsed. Crazy 2 screamed at him to get up. "He's sick," Eddie yelled, struggling to his feet. Crazy 2 slammed him down again. "Shut up, Eddie," Morton whispered, "for your own good. Crazy 2 leaned over Rebozo. He pulled back his eyelids. Rebozo moaned. Crazy 2 made an exaggerated smile and cooed as if dealing with a baby, and he went, ah, and laughed. He laughed, looking all of them, making eye contact, making sure they were watching him. Then he pulled out his pistol, rammed it into Rebozo's ear, and shot him in the head. Eddie felt his body rip in half, his eyes blurred, and his brain went numb. The echo of the gunshot hung in the mind as Rebozo's face soaked into a spreading puddle of blood. Morton put his hands over his mouth. The captain looked down. Nobody moved. Crazy 2 kicked black dirt over the body, then glared at Eddie and spat at his feet. He yelled something at Crazy 3 and Crazy 4, both of whom seemed as stunned as the prisoners. For a moment, Crazy 3 shook his head and mumbled, as if saying a prayer, his eyelids lowered and his lips moving furiously. But Crazy 2 waved the gun and yelled again. Crazy 3 and 4 slowly lifted Rebozo's body by its feet and dragged it along the mine floor, leaving a trail of wet blood, which in the darkness looked like spilt oil. They dropped him against the wall next to a pickaxe. After that, Eddie stopped praying. He stopped counting days. He and the captain spoke only of escaping before they all met the same fate. The captain figured the enemy war effort was desperate. That was why they needed every half-dead prisoner to scrape coal. Each day in the mine, there were fewer and fewer bodies. At night, Eddie heard bombing. It seemed to be getting closer. If things got too bad, the captain figured, their captors would bail out, destroy everything. He'd seen ditches dug beyond the prisoner barracks and large oil barrels positioned up the steep hill. The oil's for burning the evidence, the captain whispered. They're digging our graves. 3 weeks later, under a hazy moon sky, Crazy 3 was inside the barracks standing guard. He had 2 large rocks, almost the size of bricks, which in his boredom he tried to juggle. He kept dropping them, picking them up, tossing them high and dropping them again. Eddie, covered in black ash, looked up, annoyed at the thudding noise. He'd been trying to sleep, but now he lifted himself up slowly. His vision cleared. He felt his nerves pricking the life. Captain, he whispered, you ready to move? The captain raised his head. What are you thinking? Them rocks, Eddie nodded toward the guard. What about them? The captain said. I can juggle, Eddie whispered. The captain squinted. What? But Eddie was already yelling at the guard. Hey, yo, you're doing it wrong. He made a circular motion with his palms. This way. You do it this way. Gimme. He held out his hands. I can juggle. Gimme. Crazy 3 looked at him cautiously. Of all the guards that he felt, he had his best chance with this one. Crazy 3 had occasionally sneaked the prisoners pieces of bread and tossed them through the small hut hole that served as a window. Eddie made the circular motion again and smiled. Crazy 3 approached, stopped, went back for his bayonet, then walked the 2 rocks over to Eddie. Like this, Eddie said, and he began to juggle effortlessly. He had learned when he was 7 years old from an Italian sideshow man who juggled 6 plates at once. Eddie had spent countless hours practicing on the boardwalk. Pebbles, rubber balls, whatever he could find. It was no big deal. Most pier kids could juggle. But now he worked the 2 rocks furiously, juggling them faster, impressing the guard. Then he stopped, held the rocks out, and said, Get me another one. Crazy 3 grunted. 3 rocks, see? Eddie held up 3 fingers. 3. By now, Morton and Smitty were sitting up. The captain was moving closer. Where are we going here? Smitty mumbled. If I can get one more rock, Eddie mumbled back. Crazy 3 opened the bamboo door and did what Eddie hoped he would do. He yelled for the others. Crazy 1 appeared with a fat rock. Crazy 2 followed him in. Crazy 3 thrust the rock at Eddie and yelled something. Then he stepped back, grinned at the others, and motioned for them to sit, as if to say, watch this. Eddie tossed the rocks into a rhythmic weave. Each one was as big as his palm. He sang a carnival tune. What the hell's that carnival tune? I always feel, da 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 da. You guys know it. I friggin' da 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 da. I forgot how the carnival tune goes, but whatever. The guards laughed. Eddie laughed. The captain laughed. Forced laughter, buying time. Get closer, Eddie sang, pretending the words were part of the melody. Morton and Smitty slid gently in, faking or feigning interest. The guards were enjoying the diversion. Their posture slackened. Eddie tried to swallow his breathing just a little longer. He threw one rock high into the air, then juggled Then juggled the lower 2, then caught the 3rd, then did it again. Ah, Crazy 3 said, despite himself. You like that, Eddie said. He was juggling faster now. He kept tossing one rock high and watching the captor's eyes as they followed it into the air. He sang the friggin' carnival song. Da, 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 da. That's it. Then when I count to three, then then Captain, the guy on the left. Crazy 2 frowned suspiciously, but Eddie smiled the way jugglers back at Ruby Pierce smiled when they were losing the audience. Looky here, looky here, looky here, Eddie cooed. Greatest show on earth, buddy boy. Eddie went faster, then counted 1, 2, then tossed a rock much higher than before. The crazy watched it rise. Now, Eddie yelled. In mid-juggle, he grabbed the rock like the good baseball pitcher he'd always been, whipped it hard into the face of Crazy 2, breaking his nose. Eddie caught the second rock and threw it, left-handed, square into the chin of Crazy 1, who fell back as the captain jumped him, grabbing his bayonet. Crazy 3, momentarily frozen, reached for his pistol and fired wildly as Morton and Eddie tackled his legs. The door burst open and Crazy 4 ran in, and Eddie threw the last rock at him, missed his head by inches, but as he ducked, the captain was waiting against the wall with the bayonet, which he drove through Crazy 4's rib cage so hard the two of them tumbled through the door. Eddie, powered by adrenaline, leaped on Crazy 2, pounded his face harder than he'd ever pounded anyone back on Pitkin Avenue. He grabbed a loose rock, slammed it against his skull, again and again, until he looked at his hands and saw a hideous purplish goo that he realized was blood and skin and coal ash mixed together. Then he heard a gunshot and grabbed his head, smearing the goo on his temples. He looked up and saw Smitty standing over him, holding an enemy pistol. Crazy 2's body went slack. He was bleeding from the chest. For Rebozo, Smitty mumbled. Within minutes, all 4 guards were dead. The prisoners, thin and barefoot and covered in blood, were running now for the steep hill. Eddie had expected gunfire and more guards to fight, but there was no one. The other huts were empty. In fact, the entire camp was empty. Eddie wondered how long it had been just the 4 crazies and them. The rest probably took off when they heard the bombing, the captain whispered. We're the last group left. The oil barrels were pitched at the first rise of the hill. Less than 100 yards away was the entrance to the coal mine. There was a supply hut nearby, and Morton made sure it was empty. Then ran inside. He emerged with an armful of grenades, rifles, and 2 primitive-looking flamethrowers. Let's burn it down, he said. All right. Done with this part 3, boy. So what happens? So Eddie uses his juggling skills that he used back at Ruby Pier to escape this prisoner situation. They shattered those friggin' guards, those Philippine guards, with the rocks in the face, the bayonet, and it was all due to Eddie's juggling skills, his ability to juggle. And they were all watching it go down. When he threw that high rock, they were all looking up, and then that was the time to attack. All right, so the next reading I'm probably going to put up tomorrow, and that's when we find out why the captain is Eddie's second person. All right, you guys. Anybody still here? Let's see. All right. Yo, who is Knight? Is that Knight? What's up, Tolan? Anybody here? Anybody here right now? Talk to me. I'm about to shut this down. This was a late one. All right, you guys. I'm out of here. All right. Peace. Any questions, email me, Google Classroom me, send me a letter through the mail, whatever you got to do. All right. If you guys have my phone number, text me, whatever you need to better understand this story, although it's not a difficult one to comprehend. Although many of you guys are being friggin' lazy and not doing your goddamn work. All right. Just saying. There's Gianluca. All right, John. You good? You writing that New Testament, bro? Good night. Good night, you guys. I'm out of here. All right. Until next time. What I'll probably do is I'll post that next part tomorrow or the following day. But we only got like 3 weeks left, so I might give you guys a little more work to do on your own. All right. All right. Love you freaking kids. I'll speak to you soon. Have a good night and peace.